Okay, so we're going to take a deeper dive into privileged access security. This is chapter 1, and chapter 1 is about why we need it, and it's a little bit about how it works. So I guess it's creating a common background for us. Why do we need PAS, or privileged access security? Over the years, the sort of things that I've seen, and I've been in the industry for a while, is that systems are becoming more and more secure. And what we're seeing in terms of a change of attack profile or attack surface is it is so much easier to go and fool some human beings than it is to attack a minor or difficult to get into vulnerability in a system. So it's interesting to see that most of the cybersecurity industry is actually focused on vulnerabilities or focused on dealing with malware or focused on dealing with dodgy content and things like that. In fact, that's the industry I come from. But PAS is different. PAS is about protecting and about creating policies and audit trails about the human interaction with systems, devices and applications, tasks and process automation, and sort of finally, really, the actual workstations that our users use in order to launch and do the process automation or have sessions with systems and things like that. So, as I alluded to, what privileged access security does is it creates an audited framework or a policy-driven audited framework for human interactions with systems, tasks and processes. So, as an organisation, you can look into the Osirium PAS solution and know who can access what, where and when, who did access what and what they did. You know, you can get a session recording and you can see what happened. Or if they had elevated privileges, you could see which processes they used those elevated privileges on. And just to reiterate, whenever you see a breach in the news, you often see that a vulnerability is implicated or suggested as being the root cause. But whenever you look into it, you find that that vulnerability was used as a chink in the armour to get to the credentials, and it was the loss of the credentials that did the real damage in terms of loss of data from the system. And we're talking about data breaches here. Need to make that clear because ransomware is a different class of cybersecurity, actually. If you're watching this and you want a deep dive, you probably already know that. Anyway, why do we get here? I mean, one of the reasons we get here is two reasons. One, we're not treating our people right. And secondly, there's a series of behaviours that humans have that cause us all sorts of IT security, cybersecurity related problems. On the treating our people, this is what we do to them. We ask them to remember ever more complex passwords with ever more complex policies. We ask to refresh them ever more often. And if you are a system admin, you've got a whole pile of these things to remember. And what are you going to do about it? Well, some people are going to go off and buy a vault, but a vault is not really going to get you anywhere, not when you understand how the credentials are stolen, because 86% of them are stolen from the worktop anyway, from the desktop, from the workstations. Anyway, we also need to think about what they care about, which I'm going to suggest later on is identity, and why identity is really important, because people will share passwords, but they won't share identities. Anyway, let's get to the behaviours that cause the problems. The behaviours that privileged access security seeks to funnel down decent policies and drive good behaviour. The first one is that people simplify passwords so that they are memorable. Think about this. If a password is memorable, then the elements that make up that password are most likely in the rainbow tables that are used for brute force cracking. Okay? And if they're not in those rainbow tables, they're used in the rainbow tables of the malware that is hooking onto the keyboard buffer or the cut and paste buffer to see, is this piece of content that's going through here likely to be a password? In fact, they do things like entropy checking. They go, is there a lot of entropy in this string that's just been put into cut and paste? Yes, I wonder if that's a password. And then they get other clues as well, like what has the user just done? Oh, they've just logged into a web page. The other thing is, or the second key behaviour, is that people seek privileges and hang on to privileges. So whenever they get a privilege granted to their account to do something, they hang on to it. When they no longer need to do that thing, they're not going to the HR department or the IT department saying, oh, you know that domain admin privilege that I had? You know that local system admin rights? I don't need it anymore. You can take it back. They never think like that. They think that privilege might come in useful later. One day I might be stuck. One day I might need it. And they hang on to it. Now, that doesn't mean that your staff are being bad. That means that it's just hanging on to privileges because it's human nature. The other thing is that people want to be able to control their own working environment, which means they want to be able to control their own workstation. And this is where we find uncontrolled bits of software being just downloaded from the internet and installed on machines to get jobs that people want to get done. They want to reformat this, or they want to change the format of a GIF file or what have you. So they just download stuff and do it. And the problem there is there's so much stuff out there that's actually really good. It gets the job done. But the way that the internet works is there's so many great utilities wrapped in malware or malware droppers, so they use the utility and at the same time something's been dropped in which is going to cause problems. Typically it gets dropped into the browser so that the attacking software can watch browser traffic going backwards and forwards. These days more and more devices are browser based, or more and more applications are browser based, and it's easier to intercept the credentials as they go through, which is why if you have a vault and you're taking your passwords out of a vault, they can still be intercepted on their way up to systems. There's a couple of more pernicious but minor behaviours that you don't find in everybody, and that is that quite a few users will wander off the given path and they'll start investigating a system, particularly in their moments of boredom. One of the things that's useful to remember is that about 1 in 240 people has criminal tendencies, and if they think they're not going to be found, they will act upon those, especially if they think there's some sort of financial gain or some other gain. And the other thing that happens, and it even happens with sysadmins in busy departments when contractors are coming in and out, sharing credentials. Probably the most common credentials to get shared are the Salesforce credentials. Quite often sales teams, marketing teams, they bring in temps to get something done. The IT team's going to take too long to provision an account for that temp, so they go, oh, just use this account. Because they want something organised, it needs to be a privileged account, so they're giving them the sales manager's account. And think about it, that's a very powerful set of credentials that have been moved away from your control. And you as an IT department, if you're from the IT department listening to this, you kind of don't know it happens. You suspect it happens, but you don't know it happens. The other thing I wanted to get onto was people will protect their identity. So if you take their the AD credentials and you say, well, these AD credentials get you onto the Active Directory, but they also access your HR records, your expense records, and things like this, you're wrapping in the context of identity or the concept of identity into their accounts, and they're far less likely to share those credentials with anyone else, particularly their own staff. I'm not so sure about the temps. Just as a quick aside, one of the things that we've learned talking to our customers is that quite often human error causes just as much aggravation as, on the whole, causes just as much aggravation as data breaches, because data breaches happen once in a blue moon, and unfortunately human error happens every single day, so it's 1,000 bytes is making the same. Each incident's smaller, there's more of them, and some of them can be really quite catastrophic, but they're often detected much quicker, as long as the human says, I made the mistake. Okay, so in summary, privileged access security is, on the one hand, working with people to separate them from the credentials or separate them from direct access or give them access to a process and a task. And on the other hand, it is a set of templated reverse credential injecting proxies or task automation systems or privilege elevation systems that are working with the system in harmony with the policy and the human behaviour that you want to drive. So, fundamentally, the elements of privileged access security for Osirium are separating people from the credentials of the privileged systems. The only credentials they've got are their own credentials, which really, by the way, should be multi-factor, because so many pieces of malware are sitting deep inside the Windows operating system, and most of the time they do nothing. They're just watching the user's behaviour. And when they do go to attack a system, or when they do go to do something with those credentials, they mimic the user. In fact, they often run in the background so that things like artificial intelligence systems that are looking over, they can't distinguish them from a user, because they're using the user's credential, they're coming from the user's machine, and they're using the user's browser. I mean, there's other than, and they're emulating their keyboard cadence as well. So, there's not an awful lot of difference between, the automated attack and the user these days. So separate people from the privileged credentials, and that means if anything goes wrong within their workstation, it's contained to within their workstation. They can't get any further, and if you've added multi-factor authentication, it's very hard for malware to emulate multi-factor authentication. In fact, the only way they can do it is to push something back up to the user and fool the user into entering that extra factor. PAS is also about separating people from systems altogether. Most of the time, if you look at what actually happens on systems by users, it's task and process driven. They do the same thing day in, day out, day in, day out, and it's driven by conditions. So you find that there's 6 or 7 conditions or 10 conditions that they get that make them do this thing on this system. If you wrap that up into a task, you can remove the human error part, the part that is causing quite a bit of expense. And finally, separating people from the privileges that they've got on their local workstation. Now, if you go around doing that, that doesn't help you, because the astute amongst you will soon realise that if you remove local admin rights, you've got to do everything for the user. But in our PAS, overall PAS solution, we have a function called PEM, and what that does is it safely delegates local admin rights on a per process basis. So if the process is you're adding a new printer, you're upgrading the browser, providing the CRC matches up, the certificate matches up, the user matches up, the policy matches up, they get temporary elevation of local admin rights, and they can get that job done. Right, so this really is the end of chapter 1. It's introduced you to privileged access security, it's introduced you to the human behaviours that cause the problems in the first place, and it's suggested that PAS channels users down the right kind of behaviour in the right kind of policy, and then monitors them as they're doing it. In chapter 2, we'll be looking much more closely at privileged access management, which is the process of users having direct access to systems. And then in chapter 3, we'll be looking at privileged process automation, task and process automation. And in chapter 4, we'll be looking at privileged endpoint management. Anyway, there you are, and there it was. Thanks for watching.